Hey, what's up, guys? Chris Fluck Podcast, episode 22. No, scratch that, episode 23. This one, we're going solo here. Another little confessional. You know, the month of July was really crazy for me at home. Crazy, just all kinds of stuff going on. And so I'm a little bit late getting this one out, but I'm trying to recap a lot of the stuff I did in July and trying to put it all in here. Some of the things, some of the books I read, some of the things I've been watching, what I've been into. And, if you get my newsletter, which I hope you all do, if not, go to brickhousestrength.com and just enter your email. We'll add you to the mailing list. Each week I come out with a newsletter. I'm telling everybody kind of what I've been reading, what I've been watching. And, I've been talking a lot about this guy, Jordan Peterson. Really smart dude, gets you thinking, makes you feel like you need to step your game up intellectually a little bit. Accountability is a big thing, telling the truth, all of this good stuff. And with it, he talks about these hierarchies that, throughout history, there's these dominance hierarchies that always just seem to show up. We see it in present day stuff, but we also see it back in the Roman times. We see it in biblical stories. One group trying to overpower the other, and so on and so forth. And I grew up wrestling. It's a combat hand-to-hand type of thing. And growing up, I was really into boxing. Some guys I used to watch, Sergio Martinez was a favorite of mine, Arturo Gatti. There was other dudes that fought around the same time. Personalities, Paul Williams, 6 foot something, weighing in 149 pounds. It was a lot of these smaller guys, little scrappier guys. There was Miguel Cotto, Antonio Margarito, a bunch of good guys all around the same weight class. Then you had Floyd Mayweather kind of come. Now we got the heavyweights kind of changing the game. And then the UFC, which I recently just got the UFC Fight Pass. So you pay like $90 for the year, and you could watch any fight, past and present. So I'm talking early 2000s. I was really into this, and I was watching Pride fighting, getting into the UFC a little bit. So this was that era that had guys like there was Bob Sapp, who was kind of more of the circus show guy. But then you had Ernesto Hoost, Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, Shogun Rua, Rampage Jackson, Chuck Liddell, Randy Couture, like all of these guys were just trying to put this stuff on the map. So I'm starting to watch the UFC stuff. I've been listening to Joe Rogan a lot, and they're always talking about the fight. So I know what's going on in the sense of who's got a belt, who just won, but I haven't been watching this stuff. And so I started getting into it now. And I watched, the first thing I watched, first fight, I think was this guy Cowboy Cerrone versus Tony Ferguson. I'm watching Tony Ferguson fight now. I'm 33. I'm feeling pretty good at this age, I still feel like I'm 23, I think, at times. But I'm watching this, and I'm like, man, this guy looks old. How is he one of the best guys in the game? I look up his date of birth. He's like a year older than me, maybe. A year younger than me. And I'm like, man, this guy's looking old. And here I am, only 1 year older. So anyway, this guy's throwing all these crazy stuff. He ended up smashing Cowboy Cerrone's nose. The guy goes to blow his nose, and his eye just swelled up with blood. It was kind of crazy. Then I was talking about wrestling, right? Henry Cejudo, who's in the news now, he's talking about challenging girls in matches. I think it's absolutely crazy. I don't even know why he's talking the way he's talking. This guy was 19 years old. He doesn't go to college. He opts to compete in the Olympics, skips college, goes and wins a gold medal. Mexican-American dude. He wins that. He's 10-0 in the UFC. Then he loses to the champ, Mighty Mouse Johnson. Then he loses again to, I think, this guy Benavidez, but he loses 2 fights in a row. And at this point in time in somebody's career as an athlete, you got a choice to make. Like, you're either going to continue doing what you're doing, or you're going to have to press pause and like, hey, we're going to have to regroup here, re-strategize, and try to figure out what's going to get me to the next level, because losing is obviously not an option. He does that. He beats Mighty Mouse Johnson. Then he goes up a weight class eventually. And he wins again. He wins another belt at a weight class above him. He's a small dude, 125, I think, then 135 pounds is his weight class. And it was nuts. He fought this dude, Marlon Moraes. This guy was just kicking him, like kicking the shit out of his legs. And Cejudo was struggling in the first round. Something happens in the second round, third round, flips a switch, and just takes this guy apart. Granted, Moraes might have got fatigued, so to speak. But anyway, it was a crazy fight. I've never watched girls fight ever. But I decided to watch Amanda Nunes fight. I mean, I've seen Ronda Rousey, do some of these crazy submissions that she hit on some other girls. Might have seen this one woman home just ruin her career. Rousey, that is. Nunes pretty much retires Ronda Rousey. she pretty much retires Miesha Tate. Then she fights this woman, Cyborg, one of the greatest female fighters of all time. 50-something seconds later, she ends Cyborg's reign in the UFC. And then Nunes just beats Holly Holm. Like, anybody that fights this woman is getting knocked out cold. And it's kind of crazy to see that. Not a big fan. Well, no, you know what? I didn't think I'd be a big fan. So far, it hasn't bothered me. But watching girls knock each other out is kind of weird. The last thing I watched, Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Conor McGregor. I didn't watch this live. There was all this build-up. Conor McGregor's talking all kinds of trash. He's throwing, garbage cans at buses in the build-up, trying to get after Khabib. Now, Khabib is this guy, I think he's from Dagestan. They don't mess around, man, in this country. It's rough. I think there's not a lot of money. There's not a lot of wealth. He's like the king over there, especially now because he's the undefeated champ. But the wrestling, the Khabib, I mean, he just grinded on top of McGregor. So, like, if you don't know wrestling, or, like, it could have been boring too, because he was getting takedowns and just punishing McGregor from when McGregor was underneath. Not a lot of damage done, but he just had him pinned to the ground. And Khabib was just constantly grinding, putting pressure on him. And for McGregor to be underneath there, just getting, forearms in the back of the head, forearms in his head, forearms in his face, just one body on top of the other, just grinding on him. Then the second round comes. Khabib hammers him with the right hand. It was a really good shot. Got the takedown. Same old, ground and pound, a bunch of pressure. McGregor looks a little beat up, and then all of a sudden McGregor flips the switch in round 3. But then after that, I think McGregor was like, that was it. He kind of went all in on that third round. He ended up winning the round and got some good shots on him. But, Khabib ended up getting a choke and taking him out in the fourth round, which it was an interesting fight, so to speak. And, all the hype around Conor McGregor, I think he, I don't want to say he got exposed, but he lost, I guess, 3 out of his last 4 fights if you're talking about his loss to Floyd Mayweather. And he's sitting out a little bit now. I don't know what the next step is for him, if he's got another fight coming up or if he's going to enjoy this retired life. And I just saw in the news he might have punched somebody at a bar. I don't know if it was serious or not, but it seems like if he's not actively fighting, he might be getting himself into a little bit of trouble. So that's that, man. I just got into this stuff, and I'm kind of digging it. I might even start watching boxing again. This heavyweight division is nuts. This guy, Andy Ruiz Jr., beats Anthony Joshua. You see these guys side by side, you'd be like, there's no way Ruiz Jr. is going to get him. And he got him. Then he got Deontay Wilder and Tyson Fury. Those guys fought to a draw, I believe. They're trying to get a rematch. It's just kind of nuts. So I might be tuning into a little fighting. Manny Pacquiao, the old man, 40 years old, just won another belt in like the 8th division or something like that, something crazy. So anyway, man, it's kind of cool. There's been a bit of a resurgence, at least in my life, to start watching some of the stuff that I used to enjoy. But now we're going to get into, like I was saying here, I listen to Jordan Peterson. A lot of the stuff he talks about is he's kind of all over the place a little bit, and he wants to talk about bringing, basically just being truthful, being honest. Like that should be the number one priority. You talk about betraying people, that's kind of like the worst thing you could possibly do in his opinion, especially betraying somebody that you love. In Dante's Inferno, the deepest part of hell in that book, I believe, is the betrayal of somebody that you know or that individual cares about you. And it seems that in life, that's kind of what we end up doing, is the people we hurt are the people that are closest to us. And it doesn't make any sense, and it's hard to kind of rationalize it sometimes, but if you're able to get an understanding of that, I think hopefully you'll be able to take some steps in the right direction and try to fix that. But you know what? He gets on a lot of stuff where, I have a daughter now. She's halfway to 2 years old, which that doesn't even make sense. Sorry, she's 1.5. She's a few months away from her second birthday, 6 months, whatever it is. And the socialization aspect of children when the ages 2 to 4, it's huge. He talks about these kids, these boys, if they're super aggressive and violent between the ages of 2 and 4, they see that individual later in life, is more aggressive and violent. If they don't get it figured out, if they don't get that stuff situated from ages 2 to 4, they're going to struggle. So another thing too, other than the socialization aspect, when you're trying to teach and educate your kids, it's like, how obedient, he asked the question, how obedient do you want your children? And, his answer was, you want them to be obedient enough to not get hurt. So, hey, don't touch that hot stove. But you also want them disobedient enough to go out in the world and do something with themselves and do something and have the courage to go out there and try some new things. You don't just want to be that parent who's overlooking everything and telling them, don't do that, don't do this. Hey, why don't you go do that? skip that, whatever. It's like, let them out there, let them explore, let them play, because they found in some rats, which obviously we're not rats, but if you don't let these rats play and if you don't let them explore things on their own, their prefrontal cortex doesn't develop in the same way as rats that are able to explore and play. So, when I heard that, I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if that's what happens to our children. They're getting confined. They're constantly sitting down. They're constantly watching something, playing with technology and stuff like that. And it's like, what are we doing to their brains? Down the road, we're going to get some research on what all of this technology is going to do. But right now, we're kind of living in it. We're in the moment. It's fairly young. It's 20 years now that probably cell phones are pretty big. And now we got little kids. It's just like younger and younger. Everybody's getting them the iPads. High school used to have them. Now they're getting them in 5th or 6th grade. What is this doing to our kids' brains? Don't know. Kind of scared to find out, especially now with a 1.5-year-old. It's like, what's going to happen when she's 5? Technology, the advancements of society, it's compounding at an alarming rate. So we shall see. And another thing, too, that we were just talking about this in the gym. Some of these people will rationalize the technology aspect of things like, well, hey, it's what our future is. We get these kids learning how to use the phones at age 2. It's just going to help them later in life. And I'm like, is it? Like, if you want your kid to be a pro golfer, you're going to be like, hey, we're starting at 2 years old. That's all we're going to do forever. No, the research says the opposite. Get them exploring all kinds of different things. Widen their skill set, widen their education base. And then if they want to narrow it later in life, and they want to start specializing, then they can specialize. I almost feel sometimes it's like people are copping out, hey, I don't want to parent in this moment. Let's just give them a TV. Let's give them this, that, and the other thing. And, I think kids need to see your face. They need to see people communicate face-to-face and not just seeing communication by a mouse on the television or listening to whatever it is, some sort of baby Einstein situation. So that's my opinion. I don't know if it's right or wrong. That's just how I'm feeling. And it's a ton of work to not... It's tough to constantly occupy a child with yourself and little toys here and there and not having the ability to just kind of plop them down and just taking a 20-30 minute break. When they do that and they start digging through their toy basket, it's like a sigh of relief if you could just sit them there and be like, thank God. But now kids moving, kids up and walking, it's like we're constantly following her around. But anyway, just getting back to it, it's like we want this little girl to explore, but we also want her to be obedient, and we're just trying to figure out how to do that in a way that is going to benefit her as she gets older. And we shall see how this thing plays out. Just getting back to some other interesting things, though, with Jordan Peterson. One thing he said, which we're kind of changing the subject here, is like, you can't twist the fabric of reality and not have it snap back at you. So what you do day to day, your decisions that you make, you can't just expect things to be okay at the end of the day. Like, you can't just manipulate things in a way and be like, we'll figure it out then. And then when things slip up and when something awful happens and it snaps back in your face, it's kind of your own fault that, you weren't prepared for that, or it's your own fault for thinking in that certain way. And, he starts equating this to a story from the Bible where he's talking about Noah and this ark that he builds. And he says, like, in everybody's life, the flood's going to come. He talked about New Orleans. New Orleans, I think they prepared that when Hurricane Katrina hit. They were prepared for the worst storm, I think, in the last 100 or 200 years. Whereas some of these other countries built these dams and these levees, whatever it was, for the worst storm in the last 1,000 years or 10,000 years, whatever it may be. They haven't had a flood situation like they had in New Orleans, and it was because New Orleans wasn't prepared for it. The decisions they made and the infrastructure there, it just wasn't able to suit for a storm that was Hurricane Katrina. So, and it's like, if you get flooded, it's really your own fault. It's the decisions you make. You're not prepared for it. When that flood comes, which is going to happen to everybody's life, in their personal life, we're not talking about the literal flood with the water. We're talking about some shitty stuff happening. It's happening to us. It's happening to everybody every day. Something terrible is happening to people. And if you're not prepared for it, if you're not ready for that flood, are you going to run, or are you going to be that individual that's going to build the ark and kind of get through it? And I think we all want to build the ark and get through it. And as an individual like myself, like, that's what I'm trying to kind of do right now, is to try to figure out a way to get through all these things that are thrown at you. And not always easy, and it's always tough to navigate. And I think it's going to be like a never-ending battle in like this quest to just to feel good about every decision and everything that you do. But I think that's just the way that life's going to be. So anyway, man, if the flood comes, be prepared. Be the one that's going to build the ark and get everybody through it. Another great thing that he brought up is we're just kind of talking about it yesterday at the gym, and then talking about it again today, where if you're trying to help somebody and it's not working, you might want to stop, because what you're doing might be doing more harm. And there's a lot of examples of this. People use the term enabling, poor behavior, things of that nature. People get involved in something they shouldn't get involved in. You're just constantly helping them, constantly giving them money, constantly giving them a place to stay. You're really just kind of doing more harm than good. And eventually you might just have to cut the ties on that and call it quits, because it's almost like that story about the person that's drowning in the ocean. Somebody goes out there to rescue him. Turns out that person is freaking out. They're in this panic mode. They pull the person that's going to help them down with them, and then they both end up drowning. And Jordan Peterson is like, man, if it's you drown or we both drown, it's going to be you who drowns. And eventually, you're going to have to make that decision. And you might have to cut some ties with people in certain situations if they're not willing to help themselves. So I always found that interesting, and I think that happens. You really care for somebody and really love them. I've had this personal situation. Say, I've talked about my brother on here before when he was struggling with drugs, and it's like, what is the right thing to do? You kick him out, what's he going to do? He's going to live on the street? Maybe, but maybe not. Maybe he finds a place to go. Or, do you constantly support him and constantly try to help him? Then at the end of the day, at least in my case, my brother didn't make it through that, and he ended up overdosing. Did he need... I don't think tough love is like the right word, but did he need a slap in the face? He already got 10 slaps in the faces by his family, by his friends, by his girlfriend. It's like, when is it going to change? And those are the tough things to navigate in life, and I don't think there is a right answer for it. But eventually, I think as an individual, you have to do whatever you feel is best for you, and take a look in the mirror sometimes, or maybe take a look from the outside and look in and be like, am I really enabling some of this behavior, or am I there for support and love and all that other stuff? So it's kind of interesting. And then lastly, man, every virtue has its vice. So all these things that we do in life, all the good has a bad component to it too. So, with all the light, there could be some darkness. And, Thoreau, who we're going to get to a little bit later, said, there's never an instant's truce between virtue and vice. Goodness is the only investment that never fails. So, that I think that kind of ties in with Jordan Peterson's whole thing with, being honest, telling the truth, and, looking yourself in the mirror sometimes. And, there's that whole quote that's like, if you want to change the world, start with yourself. And Peterson's like, man, clean your damn room. Like, if you want to start with something, clean your room. That's the easiest thing you could do. If you're struggling, start in there. Clean your rooms. Get organized in that one bedroom, and then you can start extrapolating that organization and that structure to other things in life. And then once you get that done, you move it outward, and you start getting better in other areas. And when you could do that, and you could start being honest, and you could stop, doing harmful things to others, then you could start doing the goodness and being good to everybody and all that stuff. So kind of just extrapolate yourself out. But really, it starts with those small little steps in there. Now, getting into that, man, I'm a little bit late on my 4th of July stuff. But I came across an article. So back in the day, man, I bought all these books from Barnes & Nobles. It was like the classics, Barnes & Noble classics. So I get into this period of time where I was reading slave stories. I'm reading Frederick Douglass books. I'm reading W.E.B. Du Bois. I'm reading narratives in the life of a slave girl. And I'm reading about these times. I've read, I think it was 12 Years a Slave. And I'm like, holy crap, it's this darkest part of history in this country that people often forget about. And then later I went into this period, I went into the Civil War phase, and I did go into the Civil War phase, but I went into the Revolutionary phase where I was really diving into the stuff, the George Washington, James Madison, that whole era when they were, Henry Adams, John Adams, we're in Boston, and you're literally at some of these historic sites, and you're like, man, I wonder what it was like to be on these streets in whatever year it was, 1770, 72, 74, 76, when all of this, the revolution is starting to kind of kick up, and there's some negativity around, and people are people want their rights. They don't want to have a king. They don't want to pay tax on this, that, and the other thing when they're struggling to live their life. So, Frederick Douglass then gives a speech. What to the slave is the 4th of July? I think he gave this speech 76 years after the Revolution, So what are we talking about here? We're talking about that era of, are we post-Civil War? I'm not sure if that happened yet, but when he gave this speech. But anyway, no, he didn't, because there's these laws going on in here. You see that movie or read the book 12 Years a Slave, you start learning about things like the fugitive slave law, where it's like maybe in the North they didn't have slavery, but they were paying people handsome sums of money to return African Americans, to return slaves back to their rightful home. So you take them back to their plantation or whatever in the South, that slave owner is going to give you money. Well, they just started taking African Americans and just, even if that person wasn't a slave, and just taking them to the South and getting a paycheck out of it. So stuff like that's going on. So, 4th of July, you're celebrating this independence and this freedom, but meanwhile, stuff like that's still going on. You've got indentured servants, you've got slavery still going on in the South, and it's just like, we have things, we have all of this stuff going on, and yet we're out celebrating this freedom and liberties. Frederick Douglass was like, no, not so fast, my friends. And he gave this impassioned speech. I've got tons of notes on it, but I try to sum it up into a few things here, in the sense that even like what's going on today, 1776, the whole point, we want rights for our individuals, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, and unfortunately we live in a nation that jails more people than anybody. We live in a nation that talks about human rights, but we have decaying civil liberties when we look out there and we see people trying to control, and they're trying to mitigate certain populations of people. We have drone attacks in other countries that 90% of the victims they're not even the targeted threat, or I think it's over 90%. So it's like we're killing people in other countries that are just innocent bystanders. We have drug addiction in this country. We have hate groups. We have mass shootings. I mean, stuff just happened. We had 2 devastating ones, I think, in the last 2 weeks. We've had just yesterday in Philadelphia, right down the road from here, about an hour, a shootout with one man. 6 or 8 police officers were wounded. I'm not sure what the final count is. So we have these polarizations, one side, one or the other. We have all of this chaos going on. And, what happened to the pursuit of happiness? Where is it? There's a lot of people that aren't happy. And where does that stem from, And that is the one thing that I don't know if anybody has an answer for it. And, Frederick Douglass, giving the speech is like, it is not light that is needed, but fire. It is not the gentle shower, but thunder. We need the storm, the whirlwind, and the earthquake. So another thing that he said here, the conscience of the nation must be roused. The hypocrisy of the nation must be exposed. So back in his time, the hypocrisy was talking about freedom for, say, northern African Americans, but really they were getting captured in the streets and sent back to the South. Is that freedom? No, it's hypocrisy. They didn't really have human rights. Frederick Douglass was fighting for it, but then again, the nation was only 76 years old. I don't even think we have them now. Martin Luther King fought for that in the 60s and the 50s. Like, we still have issues in this country. But anyway, but we need fire. We need thunder. We need the storm, the earthquake. And, I remember hearing one guy talk. We got Donald Trump in office. He might be that thunder, that earthquake, that on one side of the fence, the people that support him are like, this is our guy, we need him. But then on the flip side of that, he might be that earthquake, that thunder, that storm that might break down this whole political process, and maybe get somebody in office that is, probably going to potentially either be him, or it's going to be the antithesis of him. What's right, what's wrong, I'm not even going to be getting into that discussion, but he might be that storm that kind of blows up the whole thing, which I think he was, being a guy that has no political, background at all. Some business owner gets in there and somehow rises to the most powerful position in the world. So right now it might be some dark times in our country, but I think the light can potentially be coming, and if it doesn't come, in the next 2 years, it might come 6 years down the road or 10 years down the road, and hopefully something good becomes out of this. But, we have an issue of oppression going on not the same oppression that Frederick Douglass felt, but oppression at the universities where, Douglass said in his speech, oppression makes a wise man mad. People aren't able to voice their opinions anymore, whether it's comedians aren't able to go to college and give commencement speeches anymore, or choose not to because they're going to be restricted or they're scared of the backlash that's going to happen. Whitney Cummings, very funny woman, super inappropriate. She's like, I'm kind of scared to make jokes sometimes. And comedians are the ones that are supposed to bring light to certain situations going on. We're supposed to be able to laugh at some dark times through humor. They're scared to talk about it. Professors, tenured professors, people that should be able to speak freely feel like they can't anymore, and they're getting fired from universities. They're getting asked to leave. Students are protesting. Evergreen State College, I think it's Brett Weinstein, had students like violently, aggressively coming after him because he chose not to participate in something that was basically racist. And, this liberal school had a big issue with it, and he's a liberal person in his own life, and it's, the left is starting to eat the left is what I think is how the article stated it. And they're trying to oppress thoughts. You can't say this, you can't say that, and really all it's going to do is continue to create some madness in people, and we're going to continue to see some of this strife. But another thing too, just kind of finished up this book, A Brave New World, and it's interesting what happened in that book, and I think I'll probably cover it in a later episode of a podcast. I got to let it kind of marinate, like my boy Oatmeal says. I'll let it marinate some of these thoughts in there, but they're really trying to control people's thinking, control the process, and if you're somebody that's going to deviate from that, they didn't want creativity, they don't want originality. If you're going to deviate from the system, we're just going to remove you from the system, and that's kind of what's going on at some of these schools and universities. It's kind of sad. Doesn't really tie into the type of oppression that Frederick Douglass and his people faced, but oppression is oppression, and he said it then and he said it now. Oppression makes a wise man mad, and it's 100% true. Now, Douglass at the time, he was hopeful because the nation was still so young. We're in the 243rd year, I believe. This was 76 years old, this country of ours. So he was hopeful. He had some hope. Slavery was still going on. They had the fugitive slave law. Slaves and anybody, a person of color, basically, they would just get picked up, sent to the South. We said that already, And one of the big things that he had, one of the big issues he had, was all this stuff's going on, but yet there's people in this country, and it goes on today too, where we shed tears. You shed tears over other countries, but enforce the strictest silence in regard to the wrongs of America. I think it's Martin Luther King said it, where it's like it's not the actions of our enemies, but the silence of our friends, of our allies that is really the problem. And it's like people need to step up. Let's not worry about what's going on elsewhere. Let's worry about this terrible stuff that's going on in our country today. And Douglass said it then, and it's kind of true now. Now's not the time to be quiet. Now is the time. If people are being oppressed and their thoughts and opinions are being oppressed, the people that do the oppressing are going to get rewarded. They're getting rewarded for it because the oppressor is getting fired, or they're leaving, or they're refusing to go speak at certain places. They're being quieted down. The oppressor wins, and they're going to continue to keep pushing the envelope and continue to oppress people even more. Their behavior is indirectly getting rewarded, some sort of positive reinforcement's kind of going on there. So that being said, if these oppressors are getting rewarded for their behavior, they're going to continue to push the needle. If nobody steps up and puts an end to it, if nobody steps up and voices their opinion, that bar is still going to get pushed. And then what's going to happen next, I don't know, but it's kind of scary. Oppression in other countries, where you talk about things that happened in the Soviet Union, other countries like that, where you start oppressing voices, things get ugly, things get bad, and we're not there yet, but it could go in that direction. I always thought about it. I got a lot of respect for my boy, just told me a story, Christian, man. He was always the one to speak up when we were growing up. We were just out with some friends. I wasn't there. I couldn't make it, but it was a bachelor party situation, so people were drinking, and our one buddy was just killing some kid he didn't even know, just like giving him crap all night, flicking his hat, just talking stupid. And keep in mind, these are people in their 30s. And then Christian, man, he stepped up and just told him to shut up. And might have threatened some violence, which isn't always the answer, but was like, dude, quit picking on this dude, just shut the hell up for a little bit. And those are the type of people that we need more of. The people that kind of step up and stick up for people when things aren't going wrong. You see somebody getting pelted with something, you might need to step up and put an end to that. You see somebody getting picked on, be the one to step up and say something. I'm realizing that I wasn't that person ever, not ever, but trying to become that person. I think that's all we can do. And if we as a country kind of become that, we could probably kick out these oppressors and start being able to live freely, like the people that wrote the Fourth, or on the 4th of July, that wrote that independence. They set out for it. Frederick Douglass set out for that. Some of these other people that fought for freedom set out for it, whether it's female rights, whether it's just civil rights in general, basically. People need to step up, let their voice be heard, and stand up to the oppressors instead of giving in, because when we give in to the oppressors, they're going to continue to push the needle, continue doing more, and that just equals bad things for us. So, that being said, let's not shed tears over what's going on elsewhere. Let's focus on what we got going on here. Now, Ray Dalio is another man. Bridgewater, I think, is his company. He was featured. I use some of his tips for my retirement strategies. You pick up Tony Robbins' book, Total Money Makeover. There's a good chunk of that dedicated to this guy, Ray Dalio. Basically, he's an investment guy, but he's a smart dude, and his book's principles is awesome, and it's just bullet points of like how to manage not only your life, but how to manage businesses, how to manage anything, really. It's about systems. It's about putting people in place. It should be there. Like, it's really cool, really helpful, really insightful. And, some of the words that they were said, there's no system of government lasts forever. The people have the right to abolish it, but not for light or for transient reasons. That is what they said. When they wrote this, when they declared independence, pretty much. And you need to figure out what principles kind of bind us as a country and what principles divide us, and we need to put all of our emphasis and all of our focus on the stuff that binds us and not what divides us. Because right now, it's tough to find common ground because everybody's just so hostile towards each other. Just some other things. Some other things, that Dalio talked about is just the same stuff we were discussing here. Revolt against the system that governed them. These guys made a stand, and you could say what you want about them. Like, do you want to judge them based off of their time? Like, say the first however many presidents were slave owners. Do we judge them by the standards of their time, or do we judge them by the standards of today? If we judge them by the standards of today, they're evil people. Standards of their time, they unfortunately didn't revolt against slavery. They almost embraced it and profited off of it, but then they revolted against another system. They had the guts and the courage to stand up and revolt against that. Like I said, no system of government lasts forever. Whenever people judge the government to be destructive, the people have the right to alter or abolish it. But the government should not be changed for light or transient reasons. If we decide we need to change something, it can't be for just because you don't like some guy in office. Can't be that. It's got to be legit. It's got to be real. Like I said, guys, for people to coexist, there need to be clearly expressed principles. Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence, amendments. Those were those principles that our forefathers outlined. At that moment in time, there's been amendments and all that stuff to things, but those are the principles that we thought were important. Are they still important to us today? I would say yes, but we need to figure that out. We need to have something clearly expressed, because right now it doesn't seem that there's clearly defined goals on what our mission is as a country. Figure out what the principles are that bind us and what divide us. Focus on what binds us, not what divides us. Now, we're talking government. We're talking about government stuff, right? And unfortunately, with more information comes more craziness. I watched something absolutely nuts. Now, I am not a conspiracy theorist by any means, but let me tell you something. The more I learn, the more I start questioning what the heck is going on around here. So, Wormwood on Netflix, all right? First off, the first conspiracy I got into, Bob Lazar, documentary on Netflix. Bob Lazar and Flying Saucers, or whatever it's called. He was on with Joe Rogan. They're talking about aliens on there. I don't know what to make of it. I'm not a big conspiracy guy in regards to aliens, but some of the stuff that this guy said when stuff became declassified turned out to be true. So it gets you thinking a little bit like that. Like, is everything he's saying accurate because these other things that got declassified are true? Or is he still kind of crazy and making some stuff up? I don't know what the answer is. He swears by it. This is Bob Lazar. So that was the first conspiracy I got into. Second one, I start to watch Wormwood. All right, what is Wormwood? It's directed by Errol Morris. Fogs of War. I didn't see it yet, but apparently he won all kinds of awards for that documentary. Wormwood. All right, here we go. 1953 death of scientist and CIA employee Frank Olson. Olson fell. All right, it was rolled to suicide. This is 1953. 1975, the report is released. Some stuff is declassified, tied to his death. A top secret experiment called MK Ultra, right? What is MK Ultra? CIA mind control program. They used it in hostage situations, interrogation tactics. They wanted to find ways to weaken the subject that they were interrogating to get them to confess to things. So what do? The CIA starts experimenting with things. We're talking LSD. We're talking about different things, hypnosis, other sensory deprivation tools, isolation, verbal abuse, sexual abuse, all of these things. They're trying to get inside people's heads, get them to I guess, say what you want them to say and admit the things that you want them to admit. So 1953, this death happens. This CIA agent, at the time, I think the Korean War is going on, biological warfare. This scientist here, Frank Olson, was part of biological warfare in the sense that they were testing out some of their stuff on monkeys, things of that nature. He was really disturbed by it. Rumors are he wanted to get out of the CIA. CIA said, no, you have to stay. They start experimenting LSD on him. He's kind of getting in a funk. He's depressed. He doesn't know what to think. He thinks, he doesn't feel safe really because he wants out and it doesn't seem like out is an option. So I think he's in New York. They go on a trip. He falls out, I think, from the 13th floor of a building and dies. His family accepts it as a suicide. But, the Sun starts digging into this stuff a little bit. The report stuff gets declassified 20-something years later. They start digging into this stuff. They find out a ton of things. All right, they find out that I think the CIA released a report 1 or 2 years before his death about how to stage assassinations to make it look like suicides. It was literally in a manual, CIA manual. They must fall from, a floor 10 stories, 12 stories high. It must look like an accident, yada, yada, yada. That's literally how his father died. They end up exhuming this man's body to see if there was blunt force done to his head. The man that exhumed the body in like the early 2000s, I think. So we're talking over 50 years after his death. They think that there was some blunt force trauma to the head of this guy. He gets pushed, tossed, whatever, out a window. You don't get the true story. But anyway, a lot of stuff gets unearthed during this time. And you know what else is crazy too? That when I watch some stuff, I watched some stuff on the Unabomber. And when he was at Harvard, he went to Harvard as a young man. I think he got out of high school, say 16 years old. He enrolls in Harvard. Ted Kaczynski's name shows up on some of these experiments that were done. They were doing this guy, a psychologist at Harvard, Henry Murray, was studying the effects of stress on the human psyche. So with Kaczynski, allegedly, they were putting him in these stressful situations, locking him in rooms by himself, abusing him verbally, all this other stuff, sensory deprivation type tools. And some people believe that this treatment that happened at Harvard might have led to his psychological issues later in life. And because he was a very intellectual man, but he had some sort of disruption in there that caused him to do what he did. How does all this tie in together? I don't know, man. It's conspiracy theory stuff. I watched it last month. I had to share it. Check out Wormwood. I told some people to watch it, and they just couldn't get into it. It is a little slow moving, but if you're into like some of this, I don't want to say if you're into government cover-ups and conspiracies, but like if you're interested on what goes on maybe behind closed doors, like this is something you should really get into. It's pretty cool. I dug it, man. Could be slow, could be boring. I fell asleep, 20 minutes into the first episode, but I didn't give up on it. Put it on the next night. It's a good sleep aid. How about that? So if you're having trouble going to sleep at night and you want to learn a little bit in the process, start watching Wormwood. How about that for an endorsement, Netflix? Now we're getting to the big bulk of this stuff, man. A little book. Each time I do one of these confessions, I'm going to dive into a book, right? Today, this one, Henry David Thoreau, Walden. All right, man, this is a crazy book. I read it maybe 3 times. First time I liked it. Second time liked it even more. Third time I was like, why did I like this so much? Part of it is good. But listening to him talk about how much he spent on buying seeds so he could grow potatoes and stuff and store them in his basement, wasn't really into all that. But anyway, basically the concept of this book is this. I don't remember the year, but 2 years, 2 months, 2 days, he went out in the woods. He built a house in Concord, Massachusetts, right by Walden Pond. All right, that's where the name came from. And then he just starts getting into things, during his time in isolation. He talked to people, but it was solitary. There was solitude. He looked around and he talked to other people, talked to other farmers. He saw men who inherited farms. Why should they be digging their graves? Why should they be digging their graves as soon as they are born? Their family had a farm, so they get the farm. By a fate called necessity, they are employed for life. He has no time to be anything but a machine. So, as some people might look at it as a positive, inheriting a large piece of property in a farm, really you're enslaved to that piece of land and all the work that has to go with it. And is that really a way to live? I'm going to say no to that, Thoreau, my man, and I think I agree with him on it. Worst of all is when you are the slave driver of yourself. That's what happens. A lot of us get in our own heads and prevent ourselves from doing the other stuff. Self-emancipation. That's what we should all be working on. Public opinion is a weak tyrant compared with our private opinion. Sometimes we let what the public thinks of us, but really it's what goes on in between our ears, behind closed doors, that really affect our lives and how our lives are. It's those private moments, man. They really affect who we are as an individual. And, it's important for us to kind of feel good about what we're doing. Who cares about what other people say? And just try to live the best life that you can. One thing I like here, I put this in my newsletter a couple months ago. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. We're all desperate to make changes, but we're quiet. We don't change anything. We don't express the things we want to say. The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation. You look around, man, some people, they're hurting inside, they're struggling, but they don't know what to do. They don't know who to turn to, who to go to, and then they just, wither away, by themselves, and they have to hold these feelings back. And, it's tough, but it's important to get what you're thinking out there. Toughest thing I've ever done in my life was to tell somebody how you feel about them. Somebody asked me once, why is it so hard to tell that person how you feel? I didn't have an answer for it. I don't know why, but, being quiet and not expressing things is not the way to do it. Now, back in my days as a coach, there's these veteran coaches. Basically what Thoreau says, age is no better qualified for an instructor as youth. Just because somebody has some age on you, just because they have some experience, it doesn't qualify them for anything. If that person, that coach, that teacher is not trying to get better, you might be better off with that person who's still learning the ropes, who's still trying to push the needle, still challenging different thoughts, still challenging different ideas. You might learn more from that person than from that individual who's been doing it for 20 years and they're just kind of going to do what they do because that's the way it's been done and that's how it's going to be done. Nothing revolutionary has ever happened by doing things the way that they've always been done. And oftentimes revolutionary things happen in youth or people that aren't as experienced, the people that are going to say, screw it, I'm going to try this out. It doesn't matter what other people say. Or, you could be 50 years old and say, like the lady that started Orange Theory Fitness. I think she started it in her 40s. I think she's 60 now, but I don't know. Anyway, she started a movement and, she was inexperienced at the time. Granted, she was in her 40s, so she wasn't youthful per se compared to a 20-year-old, but she was youthful in the sense of experience and stuff like that. So you need those people. You need the youth. You need the people to really push the needle. And he talked about it then, right in this book, Walden, and it's still true to this day, man. Confucius. To know that we know what we know, and that we do not know what we do not know. That is true knowledge. How about that for some thought process right there? Confucius, man, I can't even put a year on when that guy was alive. But to know that we know what we know and that we do not know what we do not know, that is true knowledge. I dig it. I think it's 100% accurate. saying what I was saying about challenging ideas and stuff like that. We need to know what we know, and we need to know when to push the needle on some things, and we need to know when to kind of step back and understand, hey, this person, they might know a little bit more than I do, or I'm not educated yet to go do that. Let me go back to the classroom. Let me go back to the drawing board, figure some stuff out before I move forward. Confucius, man, dropping knowledge back in the day, man. I don't even know what year he was born. I wish I had Fiegel or somebody here to tell me so we could look some of this stuff up, but a shout out to Confucius, man. For real, dropping knowledge. All right. Our skeletons are not to be distinguished from those of our ancestors. Sounds a little dark. Sounds a little bit like what I read from this man Leo Tolstoy, in the sense that a few hundred years from now, our skeleton, who's going to be talking about us? It sounds sad, but it's kind of true in the sense that our skeletons are going to look the same. Whether it's my skeletons will look the same as the greatest person on the planet. So, how does that tie in with things, man? And how we live our daily life? I don't know, but it's maybe just that quiet reminder that one day we might not be here. So let's live life the way we want to live it, and be happy doing the things that we are doing. Because at the end of the day, man, we're all not going to be here. We're not going to live forever. So our skeletons are not to be distinguished from those of our ancestors. Dark stuff. I like, guys. Sorry for making you listen to that. Comforts of life, not only indispensable, but positive hindrances to the elevation of mankind. Being comfortable, man, that is a hindrance to mankind. Great things are done when things are uncomfortable, when we have to be courageous, when we have to speak out. That's when great advancements are done. It was true then, it was true in 1776, and it's true now, man. Getting outside of your comfort zone, that's what it's all about. Shout out to my boy David Goggins, who talks about that all the time, by the way. A lot of people, professors of philosophy, but not philosophers. It is admirable to profess because it was once admirable to live. Philosophers lived back in the day, or people lived. Now people want to talk about living. It's a problem. Get out there and live your life the way you want to live it. This is my favorite one because I wear athletic apparel every day, and I never want to have meetings. I never want to dress up for anything. Beware. When I read this 5, 6, 7 years ago, I was like, now I got a quote from a man named Thoreau. He's going to sum it up for me perfect. Beware of all enterprises that require new clothes, and not rather a new wearer of clothes. It's not about the suit, it's about the man inside the suit. Always true. At least that's my opinion on the matter. You could look the part, but you could be a total clown. Care about the person inside the clothes and not the clothes themselves. Who cares about if it's some sort of designer BS, or if you're driving some nice Escalade, or you live on the big house on the hill? Who cares about that crap if you're a clown? Try to be a good person. You could be a good person and live on the house on the hill, but it's not about the comforts of life, guys. Remember that. While civilization has been improving our houses, it has not equally improved the men who inhabit them. I dig that too, man. We want to get better as a society. We need to improve at the individual level. Like I said with Jordan Peterson stuff early, start with yourself. That's what needs to happen. Become a better person, and then the world is going to be a better place if you're a better person. You're going to change something in this world if you're feeling better about yourself. 100% true. But this is a new quote here. Back to the book. But, says one, you do not mean that the students should go to work with their hands instead of their heads? This is back in the day they're talking about this. People are questioning the fact, hey, we need to get our minds right? We need to educate ourselves. But then at the end of it, people couldn't even build a house for themselves back in the 1800s. And we're kind of seeing that movement now where they're trying to encourage trade schools, because right now there's a shortage of that stuff. I can't do anything when it comes to housework, and I never learned it. Is it my fault for not pursuing it? Absolutely. But in the schools too, it wasn't encouraged. Nobody taught me how to do anything. I didn't choose to go to tech, and I didn't choose to explore this stuff in the outside world. Now, I think it's worse than it was when I was growing up. So they had that issue back in the day, astonishment. What do you mean you want these people to work with their hands? People need to work with their hands. You take a look, there's all kinds of work going on. There's roads being done everywhere around here. There's a place across the street getting cleaned up right now. There's plumbers. People putting roofs on houses. You know, what's going to happen when you got that nice house on the hill but you don't know how to start a weed whacker. You got to call somebody that knows how to do it, man, because nobody taught you back in the day. All right. To my astonishment, I was informed on leaving college that I had studied navigation. Congratulations. Why, if I had taken one turn down the harbor, I should have known more about it. So what he's saying is, if he would have been out exploring on his own in that boat, he would have learned more about navigation in that one trip than he would have in the amount of years that he spent in college. Agree, 100%. You got to start applying this knowledge. Gary V, he gets questions all the time. Hey, I want to be an entrepreneur when I grow up. His response is like, what are you selling right now? Are you doing anything? Are you hustling right now? Because if you're not, you're behind. Like, don't say you want to live this life as an entrepreneur. Be an entrepreneur now. Sell some cards. Go to Payless or go buy some cheap shoes for $20 a pair. Get 70 pairs of them. Sell them online for $40. You're making $20 a pair on 70 shoes, $1,400. Boom. That's what being an entrepreneur is, selling cards. Sell that little kid selling lemonade outside. That kid's more of an entrepreneur than that 25-year-old who puts on his LinkedIn profile or Instagram that he is an entrepreneur, but he's not selling anything. Bam. How's that? That's not my thoughts either. That's Gary V right there. And he beats that in that. You listen to him enough or read his stuff, he'll beat it into your head too. The evil that men do lives after them. That's true, 100% true. All of our actions that we do, it's going to affect somebody somehow, some way. So let's choose to affect things and affect people in a positive way. It's going to linger. Like I said, you want to change the world, start with yourself. Start here and start making good, positive things happen in life. Because we don't want evil, man. There's enough evil out there already. We don't need to add to it. By working about 6 weeks in a year, I could meet all the expenses of living. He figured out, I'll talk about these hunter and gatherers. People that study hunter and gatherers are like, these people work 4 hours a week. What do they do with the rest of the week? Leisure. They go out there, they gather their goods, they get what they need for the week, and then they relax and they have fun. They do whatever they want to do. He found out he could work for 6 weeks and then be good to go. He could farm the land, get enough food, whatever. Crazy, right? And what do? We work like dogs. I think we got it backwards, man. I think Thoreau kind of stumbled upon that. These hunter and gatherer societies, they know what's up. Here we are, struggling paycheck to paycheck just to live. But really, we don't have time to live. It's sad. It stinks. It's not necessary that a man earns his living by the sweat of his brow unless he sweats easier than I do. So on one end of the spectrum, he's like, you need to be out there and you need to work, but you don't need to work yourself into the ground. Unless he sweats easier than I do. You want to make a living by the sweat of your brow, that's fine. But don't enslave yourself to that. Don't kill yourself. Don't harm yourself by doing it. For the devil, this is it here. This is my struggle. This is my life story. For the devil finds employment for the idle. If I'm not busy and if I'm idle, that's when things go bad, man. I start thinking about doing things I don't want to do. I'll be drinking too much coffee. I'll think about, back in the day would be going out drinking beers with friends, thinking about things I shouldn't be thinking about when I'm idle. Sitting on the couch some days, holding your baby, she's sleeping or whatever, and you're like twiddling your thumbs and you're like going crazy. That's my life in a nutshell. The devil finds employment for the idle, man. 100% true. So what do? Not sit idle, but then are you really resolving the problems that exist there? I don't know, but keeping the body moving, I guess you just got to keep it moving, man. That's it. Now, a man is not a good man to me because he will feed me if I should be starving, or warm me if I should be freezing, or pull me out of a ditch if I should ever fall into one. I can find you a Newfoundland dog that would do as much. Just because there's people out there doing good deeds, it doesn't make them a good person. You see these stories about, I remember that BTK killer, bind, torture, kill. He was the leader in his church, leader in the community, all this other crap. Meanwhile, he's murdering people in his house. Like, just because somebody's doing nice things on the surface, it doesn't mean that they're a great person. Remember that now. Renew thyself completely each day. Do it again and forever again. Each morning, become a new, better version of yourself. I mean, you probably hear that enough, but I don't know if Thoreau is the originator of this thought, this process. I doubt it. I'm sure it's been said by some of these old school Stoics, but It's something to keep in mind, something to put on that board where each morning, man, you need to get up and you need to reinvent yourself and you need to try to be a better version of yourself each day. I'm not saying I do it, guys, so don't take it that way. I'm trying to put this stuff into practice the same way anybody else is, man. Let your affairs be as 2 or 3 and not 100 or 1,000. Prioritize and execute. That's what my man Jocko would say. Let your affairs be as 2 or 3. Let's focus on a few things, not 1,000. More money, more problems. I think Biggie Smalls said it in his rap song, man. We gotta focus on what's important and not all the other crap. I'm starting to realize that, and I need that reminder every 2 or 3 years. There's so much stuff I want to do here, but it's like, why don't I just focus on this gym? Yeah, I want to do a camp here. I'd love to work with that guy. I'd love to do this, that, and the other thing, but it's like, why don't I just try to bolster this place and be happy with that? So always need that reminder, always. Now, and I'm sure that I never read any memorable news in a newspaper. If we read of one man robbed or murdered or killed by accident, or one house burned, or one vessel wrecked, or one steamboat blown up, or one cow run over on the Western Railroad, or one mad dog killed, or one lot of grasshoppers in the winter, we never need read of another. One is enough. How many times do we need to go to the news and see these terrible stories? Is it really necessary to see, honestly, man, no disrespect, but to see that house burned down, man, out in western Pennsylvania, kids dying, one of the volunteer firefighters in the town who responded to a different call overhears on the thing like, hey, your children were in there, or stepchildren were in that fire. Awful, terrible. Thoreau says if we read it once, is that not enough? Do we need to burden ourselves with these terrible news every single day? I agree with them. I talked about it in the past on a podcast, and I'll talk about it again. Be careful about what you're putting in, all right? It's got to be good. It's got to be positive stuff, because that's going to affect your mindset and your mood. I do not wish to be any more busy with my hands than is necessary. Easy Strength. Read this book years ago. It changed the way that I train in the weight room. Why do more stuff if you don't have to? If what you do is enough, anything more is excess, and you don't need excess. Do what is necessary and nothing more. Nothing more. Take that time and put it towards something else. One who has just come from reading perhaps one of the best English books will find how many with whom he can converse about it. Or suppose he comes from reading a Greek or Latin classic in the original, whose praises are familiar even to the so-called illiterate. He will find nobody at all to speak to, but must keep silence about it. Had this talk this week too at the gym. I'm interested in all this weird stuff, and it's hard to find people to talk to. I was at Music Fest last week, saw my friend Becky from back in the day, high school friend. We start talking about what she does with muscular dystrophy, and then we start talking about things like CRISPR, where they're manipulating genes. Then the conversation goes to, how far do you take this stuff? Do we want to create these babies kind of in a test tube? Do you want to abort babies that have, say, muscular dystrophy? We didn't agree on everything, and then we start talking about how this ties in with this moral dilemma that you have and the Imitation Game, if you saw that movie, Experiences stuff. And I'm like, man, how many people... somebody else came then, I won't say who it was, came over and overheard what we were talking about. She was like, all right, I'm going to go get a drink. She wanted nothing to do with the conversation. There's only a handful of people that you could converse with about some of these weird things, at least I found in my life. Some of these weird books I get into and these thoughts. Not everybody wants to talk about the crazy stuff that I talk about, but I'm glad and I'm grateful that there are some people out there that you can discuss it. But like Thoreau was trying to say, you could read these great classics, but what happens if you don't have anybody to talk to them about it? You know? Then what? What do you do with that info? And the best way to discuss, you got to discuss things. That's the best way to kind of learn and kind of get things out there. And you might be able to develop new ideas, but if you have nobody to discuss with, then we're in trouble. It is not all books that are as dull as their readers. I ask kids if they read books. They say, no, reading's boring. I'm like, you're reading the wrong books. Find something you're interested in. Books aren't dull. Next one here, man. The farmer can work alone in the field or the woods all day, hoeing or chopping, and not feel lonesome because he is employed. But when he comes home at night, he cannot sit down in a room alone at the mercy of his thoughts. Like I said with myself, with the devil finds employment for the idle. I listened to Laird Hamilton's wife, Gabby Reese, talk once, and she's like, Laird comes home, and after 5 minutes, he is like antsy, ready to do something, ready to go. Super sweet when he gets home, hugs his daughters, whatever, but it's just the way some people's brains are, and I struggle with that too, man. The mercy of his own thoughts. That is it. I don't like it. I don't like idle time, man. I don't like it. You don't want that brain going in some deep, dark place. You want to keep it positive and you want to keep moving, man. All right, next one. From the book, I am convinced that if all men were to live as simply as I then did, thieving and robbery would be unknown. These take place only in communities where some have got more than is sufficient while others have not enough. I think this is 100% true. We see things that we don't have and we go out to get them. Is that because we don't have enough, or is that because we see some other people living in a way that we think we want to live, so we're just going to go and take it right off their porch, take it right out of their house? Interesting thought. I don't want everybody to be the same, like we're in some sort of socialist society, but it might reduce crime in that sense. So he might be onto something there. If everybody just had what they needed, man, and that is it, nothing more, nothing less. If we all had that, would we be happy? Maybe. Would we have less crime? Maybe. Less robbing? Maybe. I believe that water is the only drink for a wise man. I should throw my coffee out right now. This rule I violate, and I don't even know if I could change it. I struggle with not consuming flavored drinks like coffee, like some tea, kombucha, maybe some wine every so often, drinking some cider. I like it. But according to Thoreau, only wise men drink water. Nature is hard to overcome, but she must be overcome. Nature as in ourselves, our human nature, and I think just nature in general. We talked about the floods earlier, man. They're going to come, and we need to be ready for it. The literal flood and the figurative flood. Every man is the builder of a temple called his body. We are all sculptors and painters, and our material is our own flesh, blood, and bones. Take care of yourself, guys. We got to be healthy. We want to live a nice, long, healthy life. We can all die tomorrow, right? We all know that. But why not be healthy while we are alive? Why not take care of yourself? Just because we could die tomorrow, there's no excuse to go out and eat crap and drink until you can't remember what happened. Like, we need to take care of ourselves. Man, I might have to come back to this, man. Or should I read it? Guys, this is the craziest story I've ever read. And it's way too long. But Thoreau, man, I was witness to events of a less peaceful character. One day when I went out to my wood pile, or rather my pile of stumps, I observed 2 large ants, the one red and the other much larger, nearly half an inch long and black, fiercely contending with one another. Having once got hold, they never let go, but struggled and wrestled and rolled on the chips incessantly. Looking further, I was surprised to find that the chips were covered with such combatants, that it was not a duellum, but a bellum, a war between 2 races of ants, the red always pitted against the black, and frequently 2 red ones to 1 black. The legions of these myrmidons covered all the hills and vales in my wood yard, and the ground was already strewn with the dead and dying, both red and black. It was the only battle which I have ever witnessed, the only battlefield I ever trod while the battle was raging. Internecine war. The red Republicans on the one hand, and the black imperialists on the other. On every side they were engaged in deadly combat, yet without any noise that I could hear, and human soldiers never fought so resolutely. I watched a couple that were fast locked in each other's embraces in a little sunny valley amid the chips, now at noonday prepared to fight till the sun went down, or life went out. The smaller red champion had fastened himself like a vice to his adversary's front, and through all the tumblings on that field never for an instant ceased to gnaw at one of his feelers near the root, having already caused the other to go by the board, while the stronger black one dashed from side to side, and as I saw on looking nearer, had already divested him of several of his members. They fought with more pertinacity than bulldogs. Neither manifested the least disposition to retreat. It was evident that their battle cry was conquer or die. In the meanwhile, there came along a single red ant on the hillside of his valley, evidently full of excitement, who either had dispatched his foe or had not yet taken part in the battle. Probably the latter, for he had lost none of his limbs, whose mother had charged him to return with his shield or upon it. Or perchance he was some Achilles, who had nourished his wrath apart, and had now come to avenge or rescue his Patroclus. He saw this unequal combat from afar, for the blacks were nearly twice the size of the red. He drew near with rapid pace till he stood on his guard Within half an inch of the combatants then, watching his opportunity, he sprang upon the black warrior and commenced his operations near the root of his right foreleg, leaving the foe to select among his own members. And so there were three, united for life, as if a new kind of attraction had been invented which put all other lax and cements to shame. I should not have wondered by this time to find that they had their respective musical bands stationed on some eminent chip and playing their national airs the while to excite the slow and cheer the dying combatants. I was myself excited, somewhat even as if they had been men. The more you think of it, the less the difference. And certainly there is not the fight recorded in Concord history, at least, if in the history of America, that will bear a moment's comparison with this, whether for the numbers engaged in it or for the patriotism and heroism displayed. For numbers and for the carnage, it was an Austerlitz or Dresden Concord fight. 2 killed on the Patriots' side and Luther Blanchard wounded. Why, here every ant was a butt trick. Fire, for God's sake, fire! And thousands shared the fate of Davis and Hosmer. There was not one hireling there. I have no doubt that it was a principle they fought for as much as our ancestors, and not to avoid a 3-penny tax on their tea, and the results of this battle will be as important and memorable to those whom it concerns as those of the Battle of Bunker Hill, at least. This was pages this man wrote about watching ants battle. I thought it was cool, and I loved it, man. And he gave a shout-out to Achilles and Patroclus. One of my favorite movies, Troy. Check it out if you haven't. Brad Pitt, man, he's a beast in that movie, and he takes them all out. And then he gives a shout-out to a similar engagement between great and small ants is recorded by Olaus Magnus, in which the small ones, being victorious, are said to have buried the bodies of their own soldiers, but left those of their giant enemies a prey to the birds. In a different engagement written by a different man, he saw the winners bury their freaking dead. We're talking about ants here. How remarkable and how cool is that? Anyway, man, I thought that was awesome. Thought I would share that story with you. Whoo-wee! This book is getting going here, man. Next up, man, back to the book. We got this, man. I thought this was cool. I had just sunk my head on this when the bells rung fire, and in hot haste the engines rolled that way, led by a straggling troop of men and boys, and I among the foremost, for I leaped the brook. We thought it was far south over the woods. We who had run to fires before, barn, shop, or dwelling house, were all together. It's Baker's barn, cried one. It is the Codman place, affirmed another. And then fresh sparks went up above the wood as if the roof fell in, and we all shouted, Concord to the rescue. Like I talked about my buddy Christian before, he was always one to step up and to kind of say something when things aren't right, or step up and kind of get involved in things that he felt were right. At this time, the whole town fought fires together. Not everybody showed up that night, but if your house was on fire, you wanted people to show up, so you better return the favor. And that being said, shout out to all the local volunteer fire companies. I've done some work with them in the past. Goal is going to be to raise some money for those guys this year as well at some events, so be on the lookout for it. But if we didn't have those volunteers, if your house on fire at 2 a.m., you got nobody to show up, man, you got some trouble, man. So help out those guys in any way possible. Don't want to sound like a hypocrite because I'm not a part of those firehouses, but I got a lot of respect for them, and I always think about it, and doing whatever I can to kind of help out, whether it's raising money or we used to train some of them, things of that nature, just to try to keep them happy and keep them enrolled and all that stuff. So such a man has some right to fish, and I love to see nature carried out in him. The perch swallows the grubworm, the pickerel swallows the perch, and the fisherman swallows the pickerel. And so all the chinks in the scale of being are filled. Life eats life, and there's that certain pecking order. There's that chain of command in the sense, there's that hierarchy, that dominance hierarchy I talked about, man, where, it stinks to see something die, but you just got to know at the end of it too that that dead squirrel is going to be food for somebody that's out there, or that hunter that is out there shooting a deer for his livelihood, for his family. Life eats life. It's a part of life. That's how things go. Cats, those big cats eating small prey. It is what it is, and we just got to be okay with that, I guess. Back to the book. We're getting there, guys. I'm almost done with this one. Why the jailer does not leave open his prison doors. Why the judge does not dismiss his case. Why the preacher does not dismiss his congregation. It is because they do not obey the hint which God gives them, nor accept the pardon which he freely offers to all. God, people want people want forgiveness, people want a second chance in life, but yet they aren't given it. It's the jails, it's the priest, it's maybe your parents, it's maybe your teachers. They talk about how important it is to have these open doors, but yet they don't grant it to people that need them. Something to think about there. Now, Thoreau, people talk about this man wanting to live out in the woods, solitude was great, yada, yada, yada. But literally in this book, I left the woods for as good a reason as I went there. Perhaps it seemed to me that I had several more lives to live and could not spare any more time for that one. He gave it a go. He went out into the woods. He enjoyed his time there. He learned a lot, but he knew it was time to move on and do something else with his life. So, to be somebody that thinks living in solitude is the key to life and key to living, you're probably wrong. It sounds like a lonely existence. Solitude is important at times, and I like solitude, but you're going to need people. You're going to need interaction eventually in your life. And the purpose of this book was not to encourage solitude, but yet to kind of go out and, find yourself in a sense as an individual. It is remarkable how easily and insensibly we fall into a particular route and make a beaten track for ourselves. I had not lived there a week before my feet wore a path from my door to the pond side. And though it is 5 or 6 years since I trod it, it is still quite distinct. It is true, I fear, that others may have fallen into it and so helped to keep it open. Like I was saying, just because this man went out into the woods and lived there for 2 years doesn't mean it's right for you. His path was worn. Some people say it's still worn today. I haven't been there. But, we need to explore things on our own. Walden beat his own path. Thoreau beat his own path at Walden Pond. Don't follow him. Do your thing. You want to go out and live in solitude? Go live in solitude, but don't do it don't do it the way he did it. Do the things you want to do the way you want to do them, and not just because somebody else did it. How worn and dusty, then, must be the highways of the world. How deep how deep the ruts of tradition and conformity. Couldn't even understand my own writing. Guys, like it said, man, how trodden would the highways be if his little path through the woods is worn? Imagine all the roads, the way that people typically travel, the conformity out there. Imagine that path, how beaten that path is going to be. Not a good thing, man, not a good thing. That was it, guys. That was Walden. I got one last thing that I want to share now. My awesome, beautiful daughter, you have a kid, and a lot of everything in my life forever was always like, I don't want things because I'm scared bad things might happen to it. I don't want an animal that's going to die. I don't want to be in relationships. I don't want this, that, and the other thing. Because bad things happen, and I didn't want bad things to happen to me, so I avoided it all. But then you miss out on a lot of things, and I didn't want to miss out on having a wonderful daughter. So we have a daughter, decided, hey, let's have this kid, and she's awesome. She's really incredible. She's so smart, she's getting big. She's very unique. She got a little personality on her, which is cool, and just love having fun with her. And she had to spend some time in the hospital. A lot of people wished her well, so one, thank you. She's doing good. She's healthy. She's going to have to deal with some stuff for the rest of her life. Inflammatory bowel disease. At her age, very early onset inflammatory bowel disease. It's things like ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease, things like that. She has some inflammation in her bowels, and her inflammation was sky high a couple months ago, and some things were happening to her that shouldn't be happening to kids. Fevers, rashes, these wounds on her body that just came out of nowhere. We're like, what is going on here? And she wasn't healing. Her inflammation was sky high. We got it under control. Hopefully we could keep it under control for forever. So those of you that wished us well, Emmy appreciates it. We appreciate it. If you could see her at home, man, you'd be happy to see her up and moving, gaining weight, super chubby, super happy, loving life, and we're loving her for it. So I just want to close with one of these quotes from Jordan Peterson, who I've been talking about a lot. Probably will talk about him because I got hours more of stuff to listen to from him. I don't even know how many, 80, 90 hours more. And I love it because he challenges me and he makes me think and he makes me be a better person. But lastly, nobody knows what God is up to, but distributing fate evenly is not one of them. The fate of our daughter, we're okay. She has inflammatory bowel disease. She doesn't have cancer. She's not going to die on us tomorrow. She's not the healthiest kid out there, but she's freaking good, man. And like he said, man, nobody knows what God is up to, right? Nobody knows what he's up to, but distributing fate evenly is not one of them. Fate, what happens to us in our life, Life's not even. Life's not fair. Life will never be fair. We need to know that. We need to understand that. And sometimes when you take chances in life, something terrible might happen. We have to understand that. We have to know. We have to know that flood might come. We have to be prepared for it. And that's it, guys. Thank you for listening. I can't believe it. I went solo for 75 minutes. I was going to cover one more book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, but it was too long. I'm hitting it with my boy Frank Donnelly. Hopefully tomorrow we could record it. Hopefully get it out to you soon. Find us on Stitcher. Find us on Google Play. Find us on iTunes. We're out there. We're on YouTube. We're trying to get this podcast out there to the masses. More people need to hear it, I think. If you have any guest suggestions, let me know, and we will get them on. Have a good day, everybody. Peace, everybody.